On behalf of all of our partners, I'd like to welcome all of you and thank our partners. And welcome Cynthia Sarthou. She's been the executive director of the Gulf Restoration Network, which is headquartered here since 1995. The Gulf Restoration Network is a diverse network committed to uniting and empowering people to protect and restore the resources of the Gulf region. The GRN works to coordinate among and build the capacity of the grassroots groups across the Gulf and pursues regional campaigns on priority issues, including monitoring and advocacy in the aftermath of the BP oil disaster, water pollution, most particularly nitrogen pollution causing the dead zone, and increasing resilience of coastal communities through application of a multiple coastal lines of defense approach. So everyone please join me in welcoming Ms. Sarthou.
What this was learned was from actually the Dutch, who have now found that building walls are not really an effective way to keep out the sea. And so they're spending billions of dollars restoring their wetlands, because they're realizing that making room for the river is what they're calling it, I think is what it's called, that those floodplains and wetlands are critical to allowing the water to sort of be held in a way that is not as destructive. All right? So it reduces the force of surge, it reduces the height of surge. It doesn't eliminate surge, but it's simply through these ways you have to protect yourself. But to make sustainable communities in coasts like Louisiana, you're going to have to do something like this. And it's not just Louisiana. I mean, if you look at predictions of sea level rise, most of the communities in coastal Florida are facing these issues. Most of the communities in coastal Alabama are going to face these issues. Most coastal communities throughout the United States are going to face these issues, as New Jersey and New York just found out. So the question is, how do you build sustainable communities into the future in an era when you have rising seas and increasing storms? And so this is one of the issues. The ways. And this is the master plan. So you'll see that there are structural protections, bank stabilization, oyster barrier reef, ridge restoration, marsh creation, sediment diversion, hydrologic restoration. And what they don't have here, but they actually do include, is non-structural. And although it's really a misnomer, non-structural is like elevation of houses, creation of sumps, green space, you know, areas moving people out of areas of that are of low elevation so that they move into areas of less flooding. So I've already talked a little bit about that. But this is what they're talking about. This is a barrier island that was dying. This is a barrier island that they are restoring because they're trying to increase the width and the length, thereby creating the protection from those storm surges. River diversions, again, this is what they would look like. They're really focusing on one right now, which is called the Mid-Barataria Myrtle Grove diversion, which is a pretty expensive and long-term process. And then the non-structural program, which is what I was getting to. Because to me, and to most of the members of the community that I have worked with, as I said, their question is, well, how do we survive while you try to restore our wetlands? What are we going to do, and what is the state planning to do to help us with this? And, you know, things are really happening quickly in the coastal community, partly because of the insurance rates that are increasing. Although they've been delayed, they're still going to increase. You know, the state has no real plan for community relocation. They really haven't gotten any bones on the non-structural plan at all. And they don't seem to feel a need for urgency. And our concern is that what we're hearing for some of this is that, well, really, we won't have the money till the next storm anyway, so we'll just start planning till the next big disaster, and then we'll use that money to create sustainable communities. Well, as you probably understand, those communities are not very happy about this. They really feel that they need help planning for what they will do and how they will make themselves sustainable. The parish that's doing the most is Terrebonne Parish. They actually have elevated over 100 houses and are working to try to do some land use planning. And one of the biggest problems we're seeing right now, which is really kind of scary for a lot of these populations, is that they're leaving. People are just abandoning the coast, whether it's just they can't sell their houses, they don't see any future, and they're just leaving. And that's causing destruction of communities. And it's also going to be a problem at some point, hasn't yet been, for communities in the north of Louisiana, potentially, because these people are leaving without jobs, they're leaving without property, they're essentially moving with nothing. And these parishes are facing these people who are moving in and becoming a strain on their resources. So what we've been trying to do is work with some of the nonprofits down there, which are now becoming problematic because since BP has left the media and everybody thinks everything's okay, most of the money that was going to a lot of the nonprofits in the coastal communities is now gone. So we've had 2 shut down in the last year. And we're trying to work with them, to work with those communities to come up with plans or at least input to the state about what to them would be a sustainable community. What are their needs? What do they need to do? And if they want to leave, how do they leave as a community? And it's pretty interesting because I'm hearing from a lot of the meetings and people I'm talking to that this, again, is a big issue in disasters or in areas that face these kind of issues, which is a community is more than just the people who live there. And so how do you relocate people in a way that maintains their community so that they just, and people try to do it. I mean, I know a lot of people from St. Bernard Parish after Hurricane Katrina that moved 12 generations to they moved to Mandeville. And so you'll now find a lot of Mandeville or people from St. Bernard Parish because they tried to keep their community together, but they lost a lot of that identity, that history, the real community feeling that they had. And so this is it's going to be a big challenge for the state. And I'm not sure that our state or any state is really able or, to do this at this time. And so we're trying to work with a lot of other nonprofits and the state to come up with a process to try to get some of this input and move this forward. And of course, I went through that. But the biggest problem that we have is funding. This is a $50 billion restoration plan, the state plan. $50 billion is a lot of money. And the non-structural protection is $10 billion. So a question, which you'll hear a lot in the news, is where's the state going to get this money? And BP has presented the silver lining in the black oily disaster is that there is now money that never would have coming to the Gulf. The BP, the early restoration, so there's a process called the Natural Resource Damage Assessment under the law, which is to compensate for loss of natural resources and use of those resources. And BP is committed to $1 billion of early restoration. And Louisiana has been pretty single-minded. They're the only state that we actually haven't had a lot of problem, getting to see the need to restore environmental resources. So they have committed, they've now gotten about $300 million, I think, of their money and U.S. Fish and Wildlife's money to do a barrier island restoration project. So they're really focused on that. They have criminal fines that went to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the state of Louisiana, unlike any other state, said, no, we want it limited to use for barrier island and diversion science. We don't want you to give us any other ability to use it for anything else. So it's committed to be used for diversions and barrier islands. And then there's the Restore Act, which may someday, if the trial is ever settled and we get some money out of that, bring 80% of all Clean Water Act and other fines that flow from the BP disaster. And Louisiana will get a share. It's unknown how much that share is, but they're pretty single-minded about bringing that money to the to the master plan. our position is that a percentage of that should go to non-structural, that we can't just fund restoration and forget about the needs of those communities and the need to try to sustain those communities as we wait for restoration to take effect. So this is what we advocate for. We are an advocacy group. We want projects with a direct link to resilience for at-risk communities. So we would like wetlands restoration project, barrier island projects to actually be situated near communities or in a way that will protect those communities. We want local jobs because BP disaster and Hurricane Katrina brought a lot of loss of jobs in those communities, and so we feel that a lot of the restoration economy that may grow out of this should go to those communities. And then we think we should steer funding to non-structural programs. And, you know, our biggest concern is that there is no prioritization. And as a result, we work with a set of groups, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, where we are working with NGOs across the Gulf to try to do the advocacy and the education to ensure that community needs are met in these processes. And what we work through is, it's called the Gulf Future Campaign or Gulf Future Coalition. It's 46 groups. It's a really diverse set of groups. There are some national groups and regional groups, but it's mainly environmental, social justice, and fishing groups that work to try to bring about this issue. And this is what we are advocating for, which is to ensure that this never happens again, that regulations are tightened, that there's a link between creation of jobs and restoration, and that all of this money that is now flowing to these states doesn't go to produce simply roads, hotels, convention centers, baseball parks. We're hearing a lot of, you know, they've already won a convention center in Alabama. So that's what a lot of the states want to put the money to. So this is what we're doing on a Gulf-wide scale. And then we move to New Orleans. Sustaining New Orleans. You're looking at New Orleans, you're living in New Orleans, and New Orleans too is facing not a crisis like the coastal communities, although I've been told at some point we may be an island surrounded by water, which will be very disconcerting. But, you know, as I said, today, although we used to have 50 miles between us and the closest Gulf shore, we now have 20 miles and it's shrinking. And there are no significant plans moving forward to restore the wetlands between at least like the Mississippi River Gulf outlet or those wetlands at the moment because the Corps and the state got in a big fight. And so now that's in litigation and we don't know how long that's going to continue. So, and of course, we're not in the state master plan because we're not considered a coastal community. But, you know, we're starting to have this, not the same problems to the level that other people are, but we're starting to see this more often. Our streets are flooding. You go to the central business district last year, we had at least 5 rainstorms that brought water up to the doors of businesses. And we have limited pumping capacity. I mean, you know, most of y'all must know, and if you haven't, you ought to go tour the Pyatt pumps. We have some of the biggest pumps in the world that pump some of the majority, a massive amount of water out of this city every day, but especially when it rains. But the problem with the pumps is that they can only really take, I think it's 1 inch an hour and a half an inch every hour after that. So if you have a rain of 4 inches, it's one of the reasons if you live in New Orleans, you kind of get used to this, which is you'll go out and at 10 a.m., Camp Street will be flooded. At 3 in the afternoon, it's bone dry because the pumps have pulled the water down. But as sea level rises, and if predictions are that we're going to have more massive rains, we need to look at how to make New Orleans more sustainable. And so, you know, our high insurance rates. And the other thing that pumping, I never knew this, but I only learned it recently. But another problem with pumping is pumping increases subsidence. So the reason we have such bad potholes that everybody says is just lousy New Orleans construction is actually because there's no resonance. We're built on peat. a large part of New Orleans is built on peat. It's actually a bowl, which is why when it flooded during Katrina, a lot of it, there were parts of New Orleans that never flooded, like the sliver by the river up by Tchoupitoulas and all that area up to St. Charles and up across the old Gentilly Ridge. There was no flooding. Why? Because they're elevated. But the other areas were traditionally wetlands that were drained, and construction people built houses on them. And so it's a peat-type soil, which when dried shrinks. And the way our pumps work, it doesn't allow any residence of that water in those soils. It simply sucks them dry all the time. And in fact, I've been told, although, that if you pump it, that part of the pumping has also cracked some of the old pipes, especially the force of pumping after Katrina cracked a lot of the pipes under the streets, which is why you see all these major construction projects going on, because they're replacing and increasing all the pipes that pump water out of the city. And that has caused a lot of water quality issues because there was a problem with stormwater and sewage migrating through these crap pipes into drinking water pipes. So there's a lot of chlorination that's needed to try to make sure that that is not problematic. And so, this issue is continuing, and it's not that we can't live this way forever, but it doesn't seem like a very resilient or sustainable way to go. And the current approach, as I said, was pumping. The solution, which has a lot of people have come up with, which isn't rocket science, is that we need to start greening. So instead of concreting all these canals and using impermeable pavement and continually using a lot of concrete, although the city loves concrete, that what we need to do is start building in more green space in this city, so that we have areas where water can reside when it floods, rain barrels so that we reduce the level of water, or at least the speed of water that's leaving. And so, water gardens, Lower 9 and the CSED, which is a nonprofit down in the Lower 9, is doing a lot of work down there with rain gardens and rain barrels, trying to reduce flooding, localized flooding at least. Permeable paving, rooftop gardens, and street and parking lot designs that incorporate a lot of green space. Rain barrels, ponds, and sumps. A lot of green space holds a lot of water when it rains. As you'll notice, Audubon Park does that. City Park does that. It's really good. And what's really fascinating is that, and I never realized this till very recently either, that New Orleans East does not flood in a heavy rain like most parts of New Orleans, mainly because it has a lot of green space. It has a lot of lakes and it has a lot of green space, whereas the rest of the city is very old and has very little green space. And so there's a move now to try to green New Orleans, and to try to incorporate sort of green infrastructure for stormwater control and rain events into our formal pumping system that we've always used. And so this may be of interest to some of you, which is Wagner and Ball architects worked for many years through the Dutch dialogues and working with a lot of people around the world to come up with this plan. It's called the Urban Water Plan. It is the holy grail of greening of New Orleans. And it's a framework for adapting our system into a very green system that allows us to absorb and retain and sustain the city through rising seas. Anyway, and I wanted to bring it up because I was thinking that y'all might be interested in this. So anyway, that is what I wanted to talk about.